I never thought my stepmother would try to steal my boyfriend, but she did it for my disabled stepsister. When I said no, she turned my dad against me and nearly ruined my life. I'm 25 now, and I need to know, am I crazy for refusing? This story revolves around my stepmother Caroline, 50, my stepsister Isabel, 23, my dad Thomas, 57, and my boyfriend Ethan, 27, who I've been with for 4 years. To explain how things got to this point, I have to go back. When I was 9, my biological mom walked out on us. She packed up while Dad was at work and I was at school, leaving only a note on the kitchen counter saying she couldn't handle being a mom anymore. That night, my dad had to sit down and explain to his little girl why her mother wasn't coming back. He raised me alone for the next 3 years. Then, when I was 11, he met Caroline at a parent-teacher conference. Her daughter Isabel was in my grade but went to a different school. Isabel had been born with spina bifida and used a wheelchair. Caroline was recently divorced and working as a substitute teacher just to keep things going. My dad owned a small plumbing business that was doing well at the time. Caroline started visiting more often when I was 11. She would bring Isabel over for playdates, and little by little, she started staying for dinner, too. I remember being excited to have another girl around, especially one who seemed so kind. Isabel was shy and soft-spoken, always polite with adults. She had these big eyes that made you want to look out for her. When I was 13, my dad and Caroline got married. Caroline left her teaching job because Dad's business was expanding and he could support us all. We moved into a bigger home that was wheelchair accessible for Isabel. Caroline stayed home and managed the house while Dad worked long hours. Isabel and I both had rooms upstairs, but hers was the one with the stair lift. Those early years were good ones. Caroline went out of her way to make sure I didn't feel left out, even though Isabel needed extra care with all her medical appointments and physical therapy. She helped me with homework, cheered me on at soccer games, and always made sure I had what I needed for school. Isabel and I got along well enough. We'd watch movies together, she helped me with math, and I helped her with English. When I was 16, I met Ethan at a summer camp for kids with disabilities and their siblings. The camp paired able-bodied kids with kids who had disabilities for activities. I was there because of Isabel, and Ethan was there because his younger brother is autistic. Ethan was 18 at the time, already working part-time while finishing high school. He was incredibly patient with Isabel at camp, and he made her laugh more than I'd ever seen. Around him, she seemed more outgoing than usual. After camp, Ethan started hanging around our house. At first, he and Isabel were the ones who connected. She loved talking to him about books and movies. He treated her like any other teenager, not someone to feel sorry for. My dad liked him right away because he was respectful and hardworking. Caroline seemed glad that Isabel had a friend. Over the next couple of years, Ethan became a regular at our place. He'd stop by after school and hang out on weekends. Isabel lit up every time he came over. She always wanted to know when he'd be visiting, and she'd get upset if he canceled. I didn't think much about it then because I was busy with school, soccer, and my part-time job at a clothing store. But during my senior year, things shifted. Ethan started asking to hang out with me without Isabel tagging along. We talked more when it was just the two of us. He helped me prep for the SATs and even drove me to a few job interviews. One spring evening, while we sat out on the back porch after Isabel had gone inside, he admitted he had liked me for a while but hadn't wanted to mess things up between us all. That summer, before I left for college, we started dating. That's when Isabel's attitude toward me changed. She became irritable and snappy. When Ethan came over, she clung to him and sulked if he spent time with me. Caroline noticed and asked me what was going on. I told her I thought Isabel had a crush on Ethan. She just nodded and said she'd talk to her. I went off to college 2 hours away, while Ethan stayed local and worked full-time at an auto repair shop. Isabel started her senior year of high school. When I visited home, Isabel was still cold to me, but Caroline said she was just adjusting to me being gone. Ethan and I made the long-distance thing work for 3 years. He visited me when he could, and I came home for breaks and some weekends. Things were good between us, though the distance was tough at times. Over time, Isabel seemed to warm up to me again, but whenever Ethan was around, she acted a little off. After I graduated, I moved back home temporarily while I looked for a job. Ethan and I were already talking about getting our own place together once I found steady work. That's when things started to get strange again. Isabel had just started community college, mostly taking online classes since it was easier for her. She was home a lot, and Caroline had started working part-time at the library. Isabel suddenly became fixated on Ethan. She'd ask constantly when he was coming over if she could call him or if he thought he'd want to watch a certain movie with her. One afternoon, while I was at a job interview, Ethan stopped by. When I got back, he pulled me aside and said Isabel had been acting weird. She suggested they watch a rom-com together and kept trying to get him to sit closer. When he kept his distance, she started crying, saying no one would ever love her because of her disability. He felt awful, but said he made an excuse to leave early. That evening, I brought it up with Caroline. She listened and told me she'd handle it, reminding me that Isabel didn't have much social experience and might not really understand boundaries. I accepted that and tried to be more patient. 2 weeks later, I landed a job at a marketing firm in the next town over. Ethan and I finally found a little apartment that we could afford and made plans to move in together. When I shared the news about Ethan and I moving in together, Caroline's face went white and Isabel burst into tears before running off to her room. My dad seemed genuinely happy for us, but Caroline barely said a word the rest of the night. Over the next month, while Ethan and I got ready for the move, Caroline grew colder and more distant. She'd make snide remarks about me abandoning the family and how hard Isabel would take it. Isabel switched between shutting me out completely and clinging to me like glue. Suddenly, Isabel was going to more medical appointments and constantly complaining about pain. Just a week before our move, Caroline claimed Isabel had a panic attack. She couldn't catch her breath and cried that she couldn't handle me leaving. Caroline pushed me to delay the move until Isabel was more stable, and my dad backed her up. Those episodes only escalated. Anytime moving plans came up, Isabel would suddenly struggle to breathe or talk about being in severe pain. Caroline scheduled doctor's visits and insisted the doctors were worried about Isabel's stress. Deep down, I started to wonder if these episodes were entirely real, but I felt guilty even thinking it. Then, last month, Caroline pulled me aside. She told me she was worried about Isabel's mental health and that doctors believed Isabel did better when Ethan was around. Caroline suggested Ethan start spending more time at the house and even hinted that maybe he could move into the spare room for a while just to help Isabel adjust. I told her flat out that Ethan was my boyfriend, not Isabel's caretaker, and that he and I had our own life to build. Her expression hardened. She called me selfish, said I didn't understand everything Isabel had endured, and insisted that Isabel deserved happiness too. She accused me of being cruel for keeping Ethan away from her daughter. That conversation haunted me for days. When I told Ethan, he was stunned. He said he had never given Isabel a reason to think he liked her romantically, and that Caroline's suggestion made him uncomfortable. Yesterday, everything came to a head. Carolyn asked me to meet her at a coffee shop. She looked nervous, which was unlike her. She started out reminding me of all she had done for me over the years, how she'd treated me as her own and always looked out for me. Then she dropped the bomb. She told me Isabel was in love with Ethan, that her medical episodes were real, but triggered whenever she saw him with me. Caroline claimed Isabel believed Ethan liked her too, but that he stayed with me only out of obligation because we'd been friends first. Then Caroline asked me to break up with him. She said it would just be a temporary sacrifice, giving Isabel the chance to see if there was something real between them. If not, I could have him back. She even framed it as a way for me to repay her for raising me like her own child. I sat there staring at her, completely stunned. I told her Ethan wasn't some object to pass around, and he had never shown romantic interest in Isabel. But Caroline kept insisting that men didn't always know what they wanted, and that as Ethan gave Isabel a chance, he might surprise himself. When I refused, she broke down crying. She said I was being selfish, that I didn't know what it was like to watch your child suffer. She begged me to think of Isabel, pointing out that she might never find love because of her disability, and that Ethan was kind enough to look past it. She begged me to do what was best for the family. I left without another word and drove straight to Ethan's shop. I told him everything. His reaction was immediate. He said Caroline's request was manipulative and completely inappropriate. He reassured me he had never felt that way about Isabel and never would. Now I'm sitting in the apartment we finally moved into last week, trying to process all this. Carolyn won't stop calling and texting, and this morning my dad phoned to ask why I was upsetting her and why I couldn't just compromise for Isabel's sake. I haven't told him exactly what Carolyn asked of me. I'm not sure he'd even believe it. Carolyn has always been so good at playing the reasonable one, the peacemaker. I also can't stop worrying about what this would do to Isabel if the truth came out. Still, Carolyn's request keeps replaying in my head. The more I think about it, the more I see the pattern. Isabel's jealousy when Ethan and I got together, the conveniently timed medical crises whenever we made plans to move forward, Carolyn calling me selfish for wanting my own life. Am I wrong for refusing her? Is there some compromise I'm missing? I love my family, but I can't give up my relationship to make Isabel happy. Ethan has always been kind to her, but that doesn't mean he owes her romance. I keep wrestling with whether to tell my dad. Part of me feels he deserves the truth, but another part fears it could break our family apart. Carolyn has been a good stepmom in many ways, and I don't want to hurt her or Isabel if I don't have to. What would you do if you were me? After a week thinking what to do, Carolyn kept blowing up my phone, telling me to reconsider. She even started sending me articles about how hard it is for disabled people to find love and how families should do everything they can to support them. Isabel's texts started coming too, though hers were different from Carolyn's. She kept asking when Ethan would be over again and whether he ever talked about her. Ethan was getting worn down by all of it. He told me the constant drama with my family was starting to weigh on our relationship and that we needed to draw some boundaries. He urged me to sit down with my dad and lay everything out, and I knew he was right, but I kept dragging my feet because I was scared of the fallout. That decision was taken out of my hands last Tuesday. While I was at work, my dad called, sounding upset. He told me Carolyn said Ethan and I had broken up and that Ethan was now interested in Isabel. According to her, I was just being difficult and trying to interfere with their new relationship. I was so stunned I couldn't even get words out at first. My dad went on saying Carolyn believed I was struggling to accept the change and that maybe I should stay at Ethan's for a while to give everyone time to adjust. That's when it hit me. Carolyn wasn't just nudging anymore, she was outright trying to force the outcome she wanted. She had lied to my dad and made it sound like a done deal. I told him flatly that she was not telling the truth, that Ethan and I were still very much together. He seemed thrown off and said he'd need to talk to Carolyn about the miscommunication. I left work early and drove straight home. Carolyn and Isabel were in the kitchen, and both of them froze the second I walked in. I asked Carolyn directly why she'd told my dad we had broken up. She shifted uncomfortably and said it had been a misunderstanding, that she was only speaking hypothetically about what might happen if I ever decided to put Isabel's needs first. Isabel sat at the table, glancing between us. I could tell she knew something, but I didn't know how much Carolyn had told her. So I asked Isabel straight out if Carolyn had told her Ethan and I were over. Isabel nodded and said Carolyn had told her Ethan would be spending more time with her and less with me. That's when it sunk in. Isabel was at least partly in on it. Carolyn had been priming her, building up her hopes. I asked Isabel if she really believed Ethan had feelings for her. She got defensive, saying Ethan was always nice, that he'd called her pretty and smart, but when I pressed for details, the examples were just normal, kind things he'd said as a friend. Carolyn had twisted his words into something else and fed those ideas to Isabel. When Dad came home, I asked to talk privately. I laid out everything, from Carolyn's coffee shop request to the lies she'd told him about Ethan and I breaking up. He sat there listening, his face growing more serious the longer I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time before saying he needed to hear Carolyn's side. He called her in and asked her to explain. Carolyn spun a completely different story. She said I had been cruel to Isabel about her crush, that I had threatened to keep Ethan away if Isabel didn't stop liking him. She claimed she had only ever suggested that I think about Isabel's feelings, not that I should actually break up with Ethan. She painted me as dramatic, saying I'd blown her words way out of proportion. Isabel backed her up. She said I had been mean to her about Ethan and that Carolyn had just been protecting her. She insisted she never asked for Ethan and I to break up, only that it hurt when I acted like she wasn't allowed to have feelings. My dad looked torn, glancing between us, clearly not sure who to believe. He said it was complicated and that we all needed to calm down and try family counseling. And that's when it hit me. Carolyn had set this up. She'd prepped Isabel with a story that painted me as the villain and herself as the caring mother. She'd been laying the groundwork for weeks, waiting for this confrontation. I told Dad I wouldn't be doing counseling because Carolyn had already shown she would lie to twist the situation. I said I needed time away to decide if I even wanted to keep a relationship with people who would treat me like this. My dad got upset, accusing me of overreacting. Then he said something that cut deep. He told me I was being stubborn and selfish, just like my biological mother. That one stung. I'd spent my whole life trying not to be like her, the woman who walked away when things got tough. But I realized staying in a toxic, manipulative mess wasn't loyalty. It was just letting myself be abused. So I packed a bag and left to stay with Ethan. That was 4 weeks ago, and I haven't been back since. My dad's called a few times, urging me to come home and work things out. Carolyn has messaged saying she's sorry for the misunderstanding and that she only wants what's best. Isabel's texts have come too, though hers were different from Carolyn's. She kept asking when Ethan would be over again and whether he ever talked about her. Ethan was getting worn down by all of it. He told me the constant drama with my family was starting to weigh on our relationship and that we needed to draw some boundaries. He urged me to sit down with my dad and lay everything out, and I knew he was right. But I kept dragging my feet because I was scared of the fallout. That decision was taken out of my hands last Tuesday. While I was at work, my dad called, sounding upset. He told me Carolyn said Ethan and I had broken up, and that Ethan was now interested in Isabel. According to her, I was just being difficult and trying to interfere with their new relationship. I was so stunned, I couldn't get words out at first. My dad went on saying Carolyn believed I was struggling to accept the change, and that maybe I should stay at Ethan's for a while to give everyone time to adjust. That's when it hit me. Carolyn wasn't just nudging anymore, she was outright trying to force the outcome she wanted. She had lied to my dad and made it sound like a done deal. I told him flatly that she was not telling the truth, that Ethan and I were still very much together. He seemed thrown off and said he'd need to talk to Carolyn about the miscommunication. I left work early and drove straight home. Carolyn and Isabel were in the kitchen, and both of them froze the second I walked in. I asked Carolyn directly why she'd told my dad we had broken up. She shifted uncomfortably and said it had been a misunderstanding, that she was only speaking hypothetically about what might happen if I ever decided to put Isabel's needs first. Isabel sat at the table, glancing between us. I could tell she knew something, but I didn't know how much Carolyn had told her, so I asked Isabel straight out if Carolyn had told her Ethan and I were over. Isabel nodded and said Caroline had told her Ethan would be spending more time with her and less with me. That's when it sunk in. Isabel was at least partly in on it. Caroline had been priming her, building up her hopes. I asked Isabel if she really believed Ethan had feelings for her. She got defensive, saying Ethan was always nice, that he'd called her pretty and smart. But when I pressed for details, the examples were just normal, kind things he'd said as a friend. Caroline had twisted his words into something else and fed those ideas to Isabel. When Dad came home, I asked to talk privately. I laid out everything, from Caroline's coffee shop request to the lies she told him about Ethan and me breaking up. He sat there listening, his face growing more serious the longer I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time before saying he needed to hear Caroline's side. He called her in and asked her to explain. Caroline spun a completely different story. She said I had been cruel to Isabel about her crush, that I had threatened to keep Ethan away if Isabel didn't stop liking him. She claimed she had only ever suggested that I think about Isabel's feelings, not that I should actually break up with Ethan. She painted me as dramatic, saying I'd blown her words way out of proportion. Isabel backed her up. She said I had been mean to her about Ethan and that Caroline had just been protecting her. She insisted she never asked for Ethan and me to break up, only that it hurt when I acted like she wasn't allowed to have feelings. My dad looked torn, glancing between us, clearly not sure who to believe. He said it was complicated and that we all needed to calm down and try family counseling. And that's when it hit me. Caroline had set this up. She'd prepped Isabel with a story that painted me as the villain and herself as the caring mother. She'd been laying the groundwork for weeks, waiting for this confrontation. I told Dad I wouldn't be doing counseling because Caroline had already shown she would lie to twist the situation. I said I needed time away to decide if I even wanted to keep a relationship with people who would treat me like this. Dad got upset, accusing me of overreacting. Then he said something that cut deep. He told me I was being stubborn and selfish, just like my biological mother. That one stung. I'd spent my whole life trying not to be like her, the woman who walked away when things got tough. But I realized staying in a toxic, manipulative mess wasn't loyalty. It was just letting myself be abused. So I packed a bag and left to stay with Ethan. That was 4 weeks ago, and I haven't been back since. Dad's called a few times, urging me to come home and work things out. Caroline has messaged saying she's sorry for the misunderstanding and that she only wants what's best. Isabel has texted asking why I'm being so cruel to the family. But what bothers me most is that none of them have owned up to what actually happened. Caroline hasn't admitted to asking me to give up Ethan, Isabel hasn't admitted to wanting me to, and Dad hasn't acknowledged Caroline lied to him. Instead, they're all brushing it off as some family squabble that got out of hand, expecting me to just come back and pretend nothing happened. But I can't, not now that I've seen how far Caroline is willing to go to get what she wants for Isabel. Through it all, Ethan has been nothing but steady and supportive. He's been very clear that he wants no part of Caroline's schemes and that his loyalty is with me and our relationship. He even offered to sit down with my dad and lay everything out himself, though I'm not convinced it would change much at this point. The hardest thing in all of this is that I really do care about my family, despite everything that's gone on. Caroline did raise me for a long time, and it wouldn't be fair to say she was always manipulative. There were plenty of years when she took care of me and seemed to genuinely love me. Isabel is still my sister, no matter how poorly she's handling things right now. And my dad, he worked his whole life to keep food on the table and give us the best he could. But I'm learning that loving someone doesn't mean you have to accept being treated in ways that leave you hurt or diminished. Caroline went too far the moment she asked me to give up my relationship just so Isabel could have a chance with Ethan. She crossed yet another boundary when she twisted the truth, lied to my dad, and tried to manipulate everything to her advantage. Now, I honestly don't know what the future holds. My dad has told me flat out that he won't support me financially if I refuse to come home and smooth things over. Meanwhile, Caroline and Isabel are acting like this entire situation is my fault, like I've been selfish and cold-hearted by not giving in to what they want. There's a part of me that wonders if it would just be easier to go back, apologize, and try to make peace. Facing constant conflict, silence, and pressure feels unbearable some days. But every time that thought crosses my mind, I picture Caroline sitting across from me in that coffee shop, calmly asking me to dump the man I love so her daughter could have him. I can still see her eyes when she lied straight to my dad about Ethan and me. That memory makes it impossible to pretend that any of this is normal or acceptable. I can't go back to treading carefully around Isabel's feelings or treating Caroline's manipulation like it's just part of family life. So here I am, searching for guidance. How do you pick up the pieces of your life when your own family turns on you because you refuse to be controlled? How do you carry the guilt of stepping away from people who claim to love you but won't honor your boundaries? I wish I could tell you things improved after a couple days, but honestly, they got worse before they started to get better. I'm telling this now from the little apartment I share with Ethan, and for the first time in a long while, I feel like I can breathe. I stayed away from my family for about 4 weeks. During that time, Caroline's behavior escalated. She started calling my workplace, leaving messages with my supervisor saying there was a family emergency and that I had to come home right away. When my boss passed those messages on, I had to admit there was no emergency at all, that it was just my stepmother lying to pull me back. But she didn't stop there. Caroline tracked down some of my college friends online and messaged them. She told them I was having some sort of mental breakdown and begged them to convince me to return home. Soon after, I had friends calling me, panicked and worried, asking if I was okay. I had to explain the truth, and while they believed me, the whole thing left me embarrassed, exhausted, and angry. The worst of it came when Caroline managed to get Ethan's work number. She called his boss directly and claimed Ethan had acted inappropriately toward a disabled family member, even suggesting that charges might be filed. The next day, Ethan was called into his boss's office and had to defend himself against those disgusting lies. He ended up showing our text messages to prove we were in a real committed relationship. Thankfully, his boss believed him and understood this was nothing more than a family conflict. Still, the damage was done. Ethan was shaken, humiliated, and hurt. That was the moment both of us realized how far Caroline was willing to go to destroy us. After that, I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo anymore. I sat down and wrote a detailed letter to my dad outlining everything from Caroline's original request that I dump Ethan to every single lie and manipulation since then. I told him I loved him, but I couldn't keep a relationship with him if he continued to excuse Caroline's behavior. I said I'd be open to having a relationship with him separate from Caroline and Isabel, but only if he admitted the truth and stopped pushing me to sacrifice my happiness. I also wrote a letter to Isabel. I told her I didn't hate her and didn't blame her for having feelings for Ethan, but she needed to understand those feelings didn't entitle her to my relationship. I said I hoped she could find love with someone who truly wanted her, but that person was never going to be Ethan. I mailed both letters and waited. For a week, there was nothing but silence. Then my dad finally called and asked me to meet him for coffee. He sounded older, tired, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. When we met, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He told me he had confronted Caroline about what I'd written. At first, she denied it all and accused me of lying to turn him against her. But the more he pressed, the less convincing she became. The turning point came when he asked her outright if she'd ever told me to put Isabel's happiness above my own. Caroline admitted she had suggested it, but brushed it off as a reasonable request from one family member to another. When he pushed her about lying to him regarding Ethan and me, she claimed she had only ever been trying to protect Isabel from heartbreak, insisting she thought I would eventually change my mind. She said she never meant for things to get so complicated. My dad told me he felt ashamed that he hadn't believed me right away. He said Caroline had always had a way of sounding so logical and caring, twisting things until it seemed like she was the reasonable one. He admitted he had grown too accustomed to trusting her judgment instead of his own instincts. He apologized for comparing me to my biological mother and asked if we could try to rebuild our relationship. I told him I appreciated his words, but that it wasn't enough to just apologize. I needed to see real change before I could trust him again. I made it clear that he would have to set firm boundaries with Caroline and stop expecting me to bend my life around Isabel's emotions.
He agreed to those terms, but then asked if I would consider giving the family another chance to come together. He said Caroline claimed she was sorry and wanted to make amends. I work at a company now where my boss actually values what I bring to the table. No more fake phone calls about emergencies from family members. No drama waiting around the corner. Ethan and I have made friends with our neighbors, and we even joined a hiking group. It's the kind of steady, peaceful life I honestly never believed I'd get to have. My dad came to visit us twice. The first time was rough. He kept circling back to Caroline and Isabel, asking if I missed them or if I was ready to forgive. It was like he thought time alone would erase what happened. I had to explain that forgiveness wasn't the issue. It was about protecting myself from people who had already shown me they'd twist and lie just to get what they wanted. The second visit went smoother. He finally seemed to understand I wasn't going back, and he let go of pushing me toward reconciling. We talked about lighter things instead, and for a little while it felt like we had a normal father-daughter bond again. He told me he was proud of the life Ethan and I were building, but he also shared things that made me realize all over again why leaving was the right call. After I left, Isabel apparently convinced herself that Ethan would wake up one day, realize he missed her, and come back. Caroline fed into that delusion, even pushing the idea that they should drive to our new city and surprise him. My dad stopped them, but not because it was wrong, just because he thought it would look bad for them to show up uninvited. He couldn't see that the plan itself was completely inappropriate, no matter how it looked. Ethan had been crystal clear about his feelings, and trying to chase him down like that was nothing short of stalking. Meanwhile, Caroline started spinning a story in their social circle, telling people I had turned against the family because I couldn't handle Isabel being happy. She painted herself as this poor mother suffering because her disabled daughter was supposedly being mistreated by a jealous stepsister. Some folks believed it, which didn't surprise me. Eventually, Isabel started dating someone she met through an online support group. My dad said she seemed happy with him, and Caroline was thrilled Isabel was finally getting the attention she wanted. The irony was thick. Isabel proved she could find someone who genuinely wanted her once she let go of chasing after Ethan. But when my dad asked if I'd reach out to congratulate her, I told him no. Isabel had stood with Caroline through all of the manipulation, and she never once apologized or acknowledged her part in it. Her new relationship didn't erase what she had done. Then, about 2 months ago, Caroline pulled one last trick. She sent a message through my dad saying Isabel was getting married and wanted me to be her maid of honor. She framed it as my chance to be the bigger person and prove that family was more important than old disagreements. I told my dad to pass along that I wouldn't be part of Isabel's wedding in any way. I also told him that if Caroline tried to reach me through him or anyone else, I'd cut off contact with him too. I had drawn clear boundaries, and I wasn't going to let her bulldoze them just because she dressed up her manipulation in a wedding veil. My dad looked disappointed, but he admitted Caroline's request was inappropriate. For the first time, he openly criticized her, and that meant something. It showed me he was finally seeing her for who she really was. 2 weeks ago, Isabel got married. My dad sent me a photo, and Isabel did look happy. I was glad she found that for herself, but I didn't regret not being there. That wedding wasn't my family. It was a performance built on the idea that I was never more than a tool for Isabel's benefit. Meanwhile, Ethan and I are planning our own future. We're getting engaged next month, with a small ceremony surrounded only by close friends. My dad will be invited, but Caroline and Isabel will not. I've learned you get to choose who witnesses the most important parts of your life, and I only want people who have earned that place by showing real love and respect. Some people might think I'm being cold or that I should have tried harder to make it work with my family. But the truth is, trying harder would just have meant accepting more manipulation, more abuse. Caroline was never going to stop controlling me for Isabel's sake, and Isabel was never going to stop treating me as competition. They didn't love me. They loved the way I could make their lives easier. And when I stopped being useful, they were willing to lie about me, sabotage my relationship, and push me into isolation. My dad did love me, but his love was tangled up with his need for a quiet household. He was willing to risk my well-being if it meant avoiding fights with Caroline. That's not the kind of love I want, and it's not the kind of love I'll accept anymore. These days, I don't wake up wondering what Caroline's next scheme will be, or whether Isabel will have a meltdown if she doesn't get her way. I don't tiptoe around lies or pretend abuse is just misunderstanding. Now I wake up next to someone who has never asked me to shrink myself for his benefit. I go to work at a job where my contributions matter. I have friends who respect my boundaries, and I have a future that belongs to me, not to people who believe they know better than me. And honestly, that's enough. That's more than enough. It's everything I once longed for but was too scared to claim, because I thought loyalty meant letting others walk all over me, even when they didn't deserve it. If you're reading this and your family is lying to you, manipulating you, or trying to run your life, please hear me. You deserve better. You deserve relationships that are built on respect and honesty. You don't need to burn yourself out to keep someone else warm. You don't need to give up your own happiness to prove your love. You don't have to stay in a place that hurts you just because leaving is hard. This is my final update because this chapter of my life is finished. I'm no longer the girl who tried to keep everyone happy at her own expense. I'm no longer the daughter who tolerated manipulation just because she was grateful for shelter. I'm no longer the sister who put someone else's wants above her own needs. I'm Maya now, building a life with the man who loves me without conditions and making choices that are right for me, instead of what's easiest for everyone else. It took me longer than it should have, but I got here. But sometimes I still wonder, was I too harsh for cutting them off? Or was it the only way to finally live free? What would you have done if you were in my place? Tell me in the comments. Thanks for staying with me until the end. And if you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. And remember, this story is our little secret, so shh.